Hello there, Seraphim17 once again. This is my Give Me God of War video walkthrough, and as you can see by the statue just over here, which was a Grendel, it has now been shattered. So, much like my theory of perhaps those statues coming alive later on, maybe that wasn't true, who knows? Somebody does, that's what the internet's for. But we're back in the foothills, and we're coming up against, I believe, a feral ogre and a couple of nightmares. So I'm going to dodge his boulders, and that is a wolver. So this is an interesting ensemble of enemies immediately. So I use the boy to stun with his ability, and I'm going to proceed to bully this guy as best as I can so I can use him to kill the other enemies. And the best way to bully the ogres is to stay in their face attacking them and then parry what they do to you, because the push to get separation does no damage. You are not in any trouble, you're not in any danger, you take no damage, and then you can use him to take on the fierce wolver, which I believe is that fellow there. So previously in my walkthrough, I've been categorizing certain enemies as Reavers, and it's actually true. They are technically Reavers. Reavers in the Bestiary are meant to be certain enemies that reside inside of Midgard, but the blue ones in particular are a hell version of the enemies. So if you ever see the Vikings and they're frosty, that's a hell Viking, and if you ever see, like, you know, a Revenant and it's frosty, that's a hell Revenant. So there are mediations of differing enemy types. So if you were ever wondering, that's their technical term, but for the most, I don't really need to change anything that we've been talking about. I now know that the Freakazoids are called the Brood, so the Brood are those enemies that run towards you in packs and jump at you, and then the icy ones are of course Hell Broods, because that's kind of the moniker that they're using. But open the chest, come back here now with all your new abilities, including Hell's Wind and the ability to detonate the Dew, and you'll be able to get all kinds of different goodies that will hopefully augment your journey. And one aspect to the journey that I thought I would take more time with when I was first playing the game is kind of the statistical side of stat micromanaging. So when I was first playing the game and I was having a tough time and I was wondering, you know, how to get the best advantage, I was putting a lot of thought into the equipment, into the gear, into the talismans and enchantments and the sockets, and pretty much what you can do to Kratos to give you the extra edge and an advantage in any fight. And later on in the game, you get the ability to use a certain resource to randomly generate the enchantments that go into your sockets. And these enchantments can have varying statistics depending on the RNG of them, because they're randomly generated. And I came to the solution that you could save before doing this and re-roll if you didn't like what you got, and it would save the resources, and you just, you know, if you don't get what you like, you resave the manual save, you reload the manual save, sorry, and then you spin again, don't get what you like, you reload, you do it again, so on and so forth, and you keep doing that to maximize your benefits, and you get the stats you want, you get the highest possible stats you want, and you're able to augment your character in some interesting ways. And this can be very effective if done correctly. However, the time it takes to do it is kind of obnoxious. I was trying to get strength, of course, maximizing strength, and I think the highest that the legendary enchantment can give you is about 12 strength on the randomly generated ones. A lot of pieces of armor, once you upgrade them enough, they tend to have 3 sockets. There might be exceptions to this rule, I'm not too aware. But if you fill each of those sockets with about 12 strength, it's going to seriously augment you, right? And give you a big boost. But one of those legendary enchantments took like 15 minutes to get by respinning. Another one took 40 minutes to get by respinning. So you can see just the amount of time you have to invest there in doing something fundamentally tedious. And of course, it's not the hardest thing in the world. You just put a movie on or watch a TV show while you're doing it. But it's just incredibly tedious. And because I knew that it was this tedious, when it came to making the walkthrough, I was kind of trepidatious towards doing it, because I thought, I'm a firm believer that instead of getting a better build, you should become a better player. It's just the way I've always been, and it's the way I think everybody should be, because it's the true path of improvement, rather than just, you know, getting by and cheesing the system. And there are thoughts for both of those playstyles, and there are people who use both of those playstyles, but to me it's always felt kind of foreign. But there we picked up the Blast of Hephaestus, and I'm able to leave this in. I have 99,000 experience, so I could buy a ton more moves, but this is kind of a practice run for a run where I won't have any moves, so I was a little bit reserved when it came to buying all the combos and everything, as much as they do make a big difference to the combat in the enjoyment of being able to do different things, and some of the moves are really, really strong, but I was trying to limit myself in some ways, so that's why you might I've noticed that there's a couple of those screens showing up with the large amount of experience. And we have rare footage of us actually climbing up a wall. So that's all the fun you've been missing out on, guys, as we take on a big ensemble of the Brood right now. So the best strategy to do this, if you want to do it no damage and have the most success, is to run up to the red door just ahead of us, where it kind of funnels them towards you, and then just hold the axe throw button, the blade throw button, and use R2s. If you do that, you will sweep these enemies and they'll never have an opportunity to do much to you, and you can get through this rather large ensemble of these dudes. However, I'm just kind of freestyling here, just attacking them, just going for it, just trying to see what I can do to them and having some fun. And it's not as clean as it would be if you use the strategy I mentioned, but it will get you through if you know what you're doing. You just have to be aware that they will come from behind you, and this enemy both has a grab and they have a ground pound, which can make them quite difficult to deal with. And there's a lot of them. There are more of these enemies on screen right now than there will almost be of any enemy, and you need to be aware of that. So use your tools, keep ahead of the curve and everything. But as I was saying, I had the mind to go deep in on these statistics, but I didn't do it. It was one of those things where I was kind of cognizant that I was having a tough time with the game, so every strategy and every advantage would help. But then when it came to recording, I'd got a lot better, considerably better than my first run. And then of course, after a bunch of patches, when they made a lot of the enemies take less damage, so it didn't feel like you were smacking things for 50 minutes in every fight, it made the game flow and the difficulty itself feel a lot more enjoyable and a lot more doable. And when you combine those two things together, I didn't end up needing it, because it was completely unnecessary, but at the time, when I was first going through, it was definitely something I was thinking about. And if you're going to be doing any kind of challenge run, or you're wanting to augment any kind of damage for Valkyrie fights, or for Nilfheim, or Muspelheim, or whichever one you're going to go into, it's definitely a good way of doing it. There are certainly better gems and better enchantments to stick in your gear, but as far as just kind of bumping up runic, or bumping up vitality or defense, or whatever statistic you're going to go heavy in, there aren't many ways that can give you that kind of raw improvement immediately. But it does take a while to do it, so with that in mind, it is a strategy. Now, one of the things I really like about this game, which is going to be useful if I do end up doing my challenge run, is that you can tell when you've upgraded things because they change visually, and I love that. I think that's a really, really cool thing. The only thing that this game is lacking, in as much as the visual presentation of it from me personally, is the fact that you cannot take off Kratos' armor. I would have wanted nothing better than to remove his pauldrons and his gauntlets and just have him looking like he did in the OG God of Wars. Can you imagine if you could take off his like trousers, and underneath it he had his original kind of, I don't even know what you would call that Grecian dress that they wore, you know, those robes. It'd be cool if he had that. It'd just be cool if we could, you know, make him look like he did in the old games. One of the things that I find to be the biggest crime in this most recent God of War is that there are no throwback armors. Why the hell isn't there the Ares armor, you know, and stuff like that? There were so many cool armor sets in those other games, so many cool costumes in those other games, and they might have made some, and I've just not found it because I be under no illusion, guys, I have not got any of the crazy good armors because none of them interest me because they're all garbage. You know, it's all, here's 1,000,000 defense, here's 1,000,000 vitality, like I don't want that, you know. And the ones that are like quite high on strength and the stuff that I do want generally mean, you know, go to Muspelheim and get 1,000,000 smouldering ashes, or go to Nilfheim and mess around in the fog with those incredibly unfun purple tier fights, like all that kind of aspect of the game. So they might exist. There might be the armors that I am longing for and crestfallen at their absence, but I don't know if they will. Google is my friend, right? It's like when I'm streaming and people ask me the same question repeatedly, and I'm like, guys, Google will help you. This is easily Googleable. This is not even an opinion. Please. Anyhow, we're moving back through the mountain, and we're coming up against some Tatzelworms. The Tatzelworm that spits at you, that one right there, he is called a cursed Tatzelworm. The ones who do not spit are just bog-standard Tatzelworms. We're coming back here with the lightning arrows fully upgraded, and as you can see, it's completely stupid how good these arrows are against certain enemies, against most enemies really. If you can get that lightning status effect on them with the arrows, there's nothing they can do. DSP 101. He was blocking and I still killed him. You know, it's really crazy just how good it can be, and when you combine it with stun moves like this, they don't stand a chance. I love the lighting right now. Look at that. That was beautiful to look at. We're basking in poison and somehow not being messed with. But there's going to be a bunch of little intermediary fights here as we make our path back to where we were going, because we're going back up to the peak of the mountain where we first met Mimir, and then from that moment onwards things are going to get convoluted, and of course nothing is as expected, and the princess is in another castle, and insert excuse Deus Ex Machina here, and we'll be going somewhere else. But can you imagine if in the future games Norse and Greek mythology meld together, even though they all are kind of archetypal, you know, same versions of each other? Because I was just thinking just then when I was fighting that tassel worm, like, imagine if there was Gorgons in this game. Imagine what the Gorgons would look like and what you would do to them. Because the Gorgon deaths were notoriously violent, right? Oh, interesting. Something worth speaking about here, guys. So we're at the part of the game where Atreus has gone through his Spider-Man 3 phase, I think it is. You know, when he gets venom in him and he gets delusions of grandeur and he starts being a knobhead. Well, that's what Atreus is doing. So he's now going to take a penchant for ignoring you. And it will mean that in certain moments when you rely on him, he will not be there. He's also going to start taking charge and being more aggressive, and as you saw with that Draugr who he killed, he can be really effective. It would be cool if there was a button for his arrows and a button for his melee stuff, so that you could kind of augment how he approaches. Or even if it was just indicative of what you do. Like if you do a certain combo and you press arrow at a certain moment, it kind of motivates him to do the, you know, stand on their shoulder move or trip them up move, or, you know, something like that. Because if you launch them when you're pressing arrows, he'll jump off your back and attack them with his bow. But I don't know if he'd do that anyway, or if it's just the way that I've been pressing the buttons. Something leveled up then, did you see that? That looked like people went from green life to having yellow life, and I don't know why. That was crazy. Look at the stun bars. Oh, I love it. I wonder if people are going to figure out what the best stun moves are, and maybe it's going to be something that we didn't realise, and there's going to be a way to, you know, consistently stun even the heaviest of Draugrs, like the big axe guy there, or the big hammer man, sorry, the MC Hammer of this corporation of tanky douchebags. He's also leveled up, which is the reason why he's being such a fiend right now. Be very careful though in these moments, because he can hyper armor through all of this and do that really quick thrust, and the thrusts have questionable detection, because it has way more of a hitbox than it seemingly deserves. So when you're backing away from it and he thrusts forward, even if you dodge it and it's not visibly on your hurt box, it seems to damage you anyway. Because it doesn't want you to dodge away from it, which is clever, because you shouldn't dodge away from any kind of thrust traditionally, unless the iframes are most generous. But get rid of the wolves, and then focus on the other guys. The wolves are the problem here because they're the fastest enemy. They're the enemy that sneaks up on you. They're the enemy that has the most subtle of telegraphs. And these guys are just... oh, I love that. I do enjoy tripping people up in this game. It's pretty funny. I'm curious why you can't do something similar with the blades, right? I was hoping that maybe the blades' hold square move was going to be some kind of hook chain to sweep the legs. Can you imagine if the blades had that kind of move? Because when you knock enemies down on this game, it gives you the properties that sometimes they do not have, so a lot of the times you can juggle them and bounce them, things of that nature. Perhaps build status effect faster on them, but even more so, it would be really nice if you could do some kind of grab to them when they're on the ground. That's one of the areas where I think the game is most missing in its God of War roots. When you knock somebody against the wall, it should give you a prompt. When you knock somebody down and they're prostrate on the ground, it should give you a prompt. It's a perfect opportunity to harken back to the days of grab spamming harpies and ripping wings off, because it was such a core component to those old games. And even if you don't like that aspect of those games, it would have been nice to just have it in here, because the good thing about the prompts is you didn't have to do them. You know, if you're somebody who's 100% averse to quick time events and you think they're ruining gaming, you can avoid them. There are some games where you have to do them, and if you don't do them, you can't win. God of War is one of those games. Isn't that how the bosses work? If you don't do the prompt on the bosses, it just resets. So, you know, God of War is both a champion and a criminal for its implementation. But this is a pretty hectic fight here. There's a lot of people throwing projectiles at you. There's a lot of powered up Draugrs. I'm going to be moving over into this area and kind of hitting them at range. Once again, Atreus is kind of doing his own thing, so don't get too excited about him. Everybody's leveling up to elites. You can use the crystals here with the electricity to do some damage, but I'm doing the vintage Darkside Fill strategy right now. Which, the throwing of the axe is probably the most controversial aspect of this game, I think, because a lot of people find it satisfying, and a lot of people find it boring. And it's understandable from both perspectives, right? It is an immensely safe, immensely effective technique that is quite samey and boring. You know, I understand it. I understand the criticisms. And especially when that's all the person does, when it's all you do, then it gets kind of brutal. But it must be said that it is really effective. And I don't blame people for doing it as much as it is kind of hilarious. Interesting, we have a possessive nightmare and it's going to hit me. God, I hate that. I hate that so much. It'd be nice as well if there was some kind of gambit system for Atreus, where you could prioritize targets, and you could tell him which targets to prioritize, some kind of behavioral scripting. You know, like they do in the Tales of games, where you can tell people how you want the AI to act, and what you want them to do. It'd just be great if you could put at the top of the echelon of priorities nightmares, or flying enemies, or projectile enemies. Projectile enemies should be always at the top. Because I don't want him shooting the Draugrs. The Draugrs aren't a threat. I can dodge those guys effortlessly. The Nightmares, not so much, because they're quite deceptive. Interesting. We managed to get the Frost off on this guy if you're wondering why he's moving really slowly. And if you're wondering why you haven't seen more instances of that, it's because Frost is much more difficult to build on this difficulty. To give you an idea though, if you've just stumbled on this video randomly, or if you don't know much about God of War, Frost is a statistic that builds on every attack you do with the axe. The more you hit people, the more it builds. You can see it building above their HP bar because there is a frosty symbol and there is a kind of a bar that moves around it in a circular form. When you fill it, it applies frost, and then the frost has a bunch of bonus abilities, the most important of which is the slowing of them, which is really, really interesting. Because there's a charge attack on light attack, where Kratos throws his axe and it spins into people, and while you're doing it, you might even be able to change a weapon and punch them a few times and then get your weapon back and continue and stuff. So you can mix it up with the boy's arrows and be hitting things a lot and building a lot of stun and building a lot of frost. And then when you do freeze them, they can't move the same speed. And it's one of those things, it's a reward for attacking consistently and being aggressive. I don't know too much about it as a mechanic, because once again on this difficulty, you can hit things a lot and never proc it because they're just incredibly resistant to it. But if you play on the earlier difficulties, you can definitely crowd control a lot of enemies by just kind of getting them all into a state where they're moving slower than they should. I see way more immolation than I ever see Frost just because of the nature of how spammable the blades are. The blades are really good at hitting quickly and hitting multiple targets and building that particular asset of them. But Frost, it's a cool idea, and I'm looking forward to seeing what it really does and if there's any kind of nice sweetness to it and advanced techniques. But at the moment, I just don't rightly know. It's one of those things that you don't even have to buy it, so you can get away with not even interacting with it. It's not quite a Darkside Fill mid-stance spear-only run of Neo, but it definitely affords players to completely ignore the fact it exists. And right there, guys, I was just checking to see whether or not the enemies had spawned behind the door. But I knew they didn't because you see them spawn in. And I was looking to try and get a nice cheesy hit on them before they turn up. You probably can. If you time it so that when he hits the door, you do the final ender on that big mega plume, you might be able to have some success there. But I decided against it for obvious reasons after I didn't hit it the first one. I'm going to try and hit this ogre with the pot, and it does a lot of damage. I love the pot stuff. I like when games give you options when it comes to encounters to do things that aren't necessarily the norm. That was dangerous just then because he undercut me with the jump attack. If I'd have not have interrupted him during it, which is quite an important piece of information if you don't know, guys. The tooltip mentions that a lot of the ogre's attacks, if you attack them at the right moment, you will stop them from doing it, which I think is really nice. I don't do it, but it's nice to know that it exists. And speaking of, that right then, you see how my axe is glowing? That's because I threw it in the hold R1 move that I was just speaking about and it built a bit of frost. But I am curious to see if there's going to be any kind of data mining for this game, because it's difficult to do right on the PlayStation 4. That's why I wish this game had a PC port. Not only because you could play it at much higher frame rates, much higher refresh rates, and make it look even better than it does, make it load quickly, even though it never really loads outside of death, but just imagine the mod potential. They would probably be able to develop a cutscene skip mod, which would be fantastic for replaying the game. Who knows what else they'd be able to do, but it'd be pretty cool. That was hilarious. Watch this. This is the problem with being a walkthrough maker. So I do a flawless ogre fight, and I get hit by a random scrub afterwards. I'm not happy about getting hit because I shouldn't have got hit, I got lazy. I restart the checkpoint and it completely despawns the enemy, and it's not before the ogre fight because the checkpoints in this game are incredibly generous. And I left that in, guys, to give you an example of just what happens in these kind of runs, which I just thought was hilarious. And it happens a lot. So my advice for people challenge running this game is to make backup saves before fights you know are going to be taxing. Because it's so easy to get checkpointed after a part, and you can't go back. So whenever you take damage, always restart the instant it happens, if you're going for that, and always make safety saves before things. One of the big criticisms of the saving system in this game, other than it being far too generous, is the fact that when you save, it's immensely vague as to where you are, and an entire area saves under the same name, so it's really difficult to differentiate between your saves. And I don't know if there's a way to like name them, or rename them, or custom name them or something, but it's just one of those things where I tried saving before the double ogre fight, you know, near Thamua's corpse, or Thamia's corpse, or whatever they call him, the giant, just so that I could have it as reference to go back to it and have a few attempts at trying different things. And then every time I went back to it, it was a checkpoint on, like, just after it. And this game does a strange thing too. Every time you die, when it restarts and reloads, it saves. It saves every single time you die and restart. So if you look back at your last 20 saves, if you've been in a really tough section, they're all that same checkpoint because you've repeated it 20 times. And to me, that's really stupid. The one aspect of it that's clever is it saves the changes to your inventory. So if you're one of those people who goes into a fight with the wrong weapon on, and all you want to do is swap weapon and have the game save it, but every time it doesn't, so you have to swap at the beginning of an encounter, and you hate that, that will not happen here. That's a good thing. But they didn't have to save it over all the other slots. They could have just made it so that it saved your inventory and it kept the original checkpoint. Because there's no need to have 30 checkpoints of the same checkpoint. All it does is piss on all your previous saves so you can't go back. And I don't get that. But this is a Frost Ancient, and I just tut it, which is disgraceful. I don't like doing that. I usually trim them out. I don't tut that often. It's just one of those things. You know when you hear it back and you're just like, why did I do that? Why did my mouth make that noise? Same with the drinking, and I accidentally tutted again then just by moving my lips after a drink, which is fucked up. And I'm going to stop bringing attention to it because you might not have even noticed. But this is a Frost Ancient. In this room, there are fiery pots suspended from the ceiling, which you can use to kill this guy. But I wanted to show a strategy that's super cheesy, that will work if you don't have access or the ability to use the pots. Trust me guys when I say the pots are much quicker, but this will also work. Due to the AI on this dude, and the fact that this particular corner here can block all of his sweeping laser beams, he is an easy fight where you are never in danger. But because you're at quite a distance from him, picking up those rocks to chuck at him or to get past them to grab him can lead to you taking a cheesy hit. And I've already discussed my lamentations, my grief when it comes to just how stupid that mechanic is, and I don't know why it exists. You might see it here actually as I run past him. See how I did the wide berth and I nearly missed the grab because of it? It's just so strange. But Kratos gets stamp happy, stamps a mud hole on him like Stone Cold Steve Austin in the OG days, and I use a quick turn just to make sure there's nothing behind me. Oh, I know why I did that, because I was fearful that I was going to take splash damage off the rock, so I quick turned and blocked. That's called heads up play, that, guys. I'm glad I was paying attention when I was playing. Which, it's interesting when you do stuff like that. You know when I was talking about in a previous video that playing Guitar Hero made me better at other games, and other games made me better at other games, and so on and so forth? It's the awareness thing. It's not necessarily the inputs or the mechanics, even though, you know, dexterity and durability in your hands is definitely going to go a long way. It's the ability to micromanage a lot of things happening rather quickly and reacting to them without thinking. You know, it's all about that ultra instinct. And it does help. Like, have you ever played a shmup game so much that it seemed to slow down when the bullets got crazy on the screen, and it made it easier to dodge because you got used to seeing it? It's the same thing with Guitar Hero. You can look at a pattern of the buttons and it'll look so dense that you can't read it, but when you get to the point where you understand it and it makes sense to you, it doesn't look like it's moving the same speed it did before. It looks like it's moving slower because your eye's deciphering it, your eye's breaking it down for you and making it more palatable. And that can really, really help in a game such as this, or in an action game, because a lot of the times in these games when you're fighting, something else is going to try to attack you or damage you from a different side, so you spend a lot of your eye space scanning the periphery, and the better your eye gets at maintaining targets and being able to see multiple things at multiple times, the better you're going to be at reacting to them and managing them and understanding them. And at first it can just feel ridiculous and there's too much happening at once. Like, look at Wonderful 101. The Wonderful 101 is one of the best games for the Wii U that no bugger played. I nearly bought a second copy of it the other day just because I know how low that game sold. It's dreadful how little that game sold. It hurts me in the soul because there's so much love and creativity in it. And then things like Assassin's Creed sell bajillions, and it's just like climb watchtower, you know, spin around, jump off watchtower, climb next watchtower. Or Far Cry. Maybe Far Cry is a better example because that's just the fucking laziest series right now. As at least Assassin's Creed took a break and did something a little bit different. But you know what I mean, these games that don't deserve shit and get everything because, unfortunately, the lowest common denominator is always the largest market. But if you've ever watched Wonderful 101 and you've never played it and you have no context of how that game is played, it looks like the biggest, most colourful mess. Because it looks crazy. You have 100 people as your character on screen at all times, moving in one ensemble of an army. And where do you look? Where do your eyes go? There's people attacking you, there's bright colours, there's particle effects, there's like fucking crazy comic book strips chucked up on the screen during combat. Like, that is one of the most visually chaotic games you could ever wish to play. But you know, once you understand it, you see through it. You see the Matrix. You don't see the code, you see the blonde in the red dress. But thank you for watching. I hope the guide is helping, and you take care now.